former President Trump has come out and said, hey, we're going to create this like Bitcoin strategic stockpile and maybe even put a dent in the debt. Is it something that you look at Bitcoin as for the individuals, or do you think that there are things with the government or central bank where Bitcoin eventually kind of infiltrates?
I hope government stays as far away from it as possible.
The banks, they seem to be leaning in quite heavily on Bitcoin. Obviously, we have the Bitcoin ETFs. How do you?
I think because it's a dam, they see they can't hold back anymore. And so they're either going to deal with it or going to get displaced by it.
What's going on, guys? Today, we have a very special episode for you. We have Erik Prince, the former founder of Blackwater and the current founder of the Unplugged Phone. This conversation is wide-ranging. We talk about geopolitics, we talk about American security, the national debt, government inefficiency, and what Erik thinks about the various conflicts that are happening around the world. Erik is one of the foremost experts on warfare. He's got a ton of experience both serving in the Navy SEALs, but also building Blackwater. And he is a great reader of American history, world history, military history, and he's got unique thoughts that he shares throughout this conversation. This is one of the conversations that reminds me why I started this show. It allows me to talk to interesting people who have interesting ideas, and it makes me think more critically about the world, and this conversation does not disappoint. Here is my latest episode. It is with Erik Prince, the former founder of Blackwater and the current founder of the Unplugged Phone. America is kind of the tale of two stories. We have the greatest nation in the world. We live in the safest, most prosperous time in human history. There's a lot of things we can point to that would give you an optimistic view of the future. At the same time, you can look at America and you can tell a story of a crumbling empire that seems to be almost collapsing on its own success. People don't want to defend the ideals, ethos, and values that have gotten us here. You're very unique, I think, in that you have an understanding of history, you've got opinions about the future, and you've been very involved in a number of the major kind of developments in the country, both geopolitically and economically over the last couple decades. And so when you look at where we are today, do you have an optimistic view of the future, or do you have a pessimistic view of maybe an alarm sounding that a lot of things need to change?
I have I'm kind of an eternal optimist. And as I look at what really made America, it was breakthroughs of the private sector. It was not no. I will have to say, I think I really have to give credence, maximum kudos to the founding fathers. When you look at the Constitution and you look at the Bill of Rights and their ability to see the problems of the relationship between state and citizens, and what was what other document did they have to reference? The Magna Carta, but yet they wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and seeing how government always grows, government always enriches itself, whether you're a monarchist or a federalist, and they put all those checks and balances, assuming and understanding that people were always going to grow stupid. And the fact that they laid out that kind of framework. And as I look at what countries in the world have really prospered versus and long-term have prospered, there's fundamental underpinnings of the infrastructure of their governance and of the people that embrace that governance. And when you move away from that and you dilute that down, you get the crumbling empire. Rome, right? The Roman Empire grew and prospered. That was not one that was really built on individual rights, as we would. That was definitely an empire of conquest. And when they kind of ran out of conquest, it ran out of gas. And of course, they debased their currency and made all kinds of bad decisions. But for a while, as it was growing, the elites were engaged and vested in the society. Remember when the Battle of Cannae happened, the biggest loss in, I think one of the biggest single day losses in military history, 80,000 people killed by sword in a morning. When the Roman Senate met a couple weeks later, it was 40% undermanned. Why? Because the elites had actually showed up. Now America's problems grow from, we have too much government. We have way too much government spending, and things have gotten way out of whack. The 10th Amendment has been ignored, right? Remember, the 10th Amendment says any power not specifically delegated to the federal government remains the sole purview of the states. because we've gotten away from a healthy rivalry between the state power and federal power, and when the federal government can literally print unlimited money, as we have, and now we're 35 trillion in debt, you enrich and engorge a class of people that the exact stuff that the founding fathers were warning about. And so we have to trim that down to size. I'm hoping that this election has consequences that will actually trim it down to size, because if it's not, then it's going to be a really ugly transition. Because I think you're going to have more of possibly a Weimar-like transition, not a smooth line. Well, look, putting any nation on a diet is never pleasant, right? Anybody that starts fasting or starts, because America is actually physically fat and our government is fat. But we either have to do it the disciplined way or in a very chaotic, ugly way.
There almost seems to be this like chicken or egg problem. The government has grand ambitions. They want to do all these things for their citizens, even if it's ill-placed, hope.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Correct.
That is the first thing that people have to remember.
But there's also the government spending problem. And so I've always wondered, is it the intentions of, hey, we want to help the people, that's why we spend a lot of money? Or is it, if you give a man a money printer, he's going to print a bunch of money and then look around and say, well, where do I put the money? Right? Like, if you have to kind of get to the root solution.
Politicians will always respond and pander to a constituency to get elected. And once they're there and once a program is started, I think I just saw a study, there's like 1.8 new government programs per year since the founding in 1789. And there's not really been a culling or a sunsetting of a lot of that stuff. And so all of that is expanded and compounded, and no force has had the discipline or the power to actually curtail that down. So you look at our healthcare system, look at how much we spend, and clearly we spend way too much. The amount of doctors has not really changed, but the amount of healthcare administrators responding to regulation and nonsense around that. And it's almost uncompetitive behavior because of those well-intentioned regulations. If a lot of the government just said, just get the hell out of the way, I think you'd find it surprising. I always compare the price of LASIK to the price of any kind of government subsidized or government regulated surgery process, and it's night and day, right? Because LASIK price goes down every year. The lounges are beautiful. It's on time because it's private pay. It's not government pay. And that's the root of the problem.
It seems like that government pay, insurance pay is a incentive system that is pervasive throughout our society where problems exist. So you have healthcare, you have student loans. I mean, you can just go down the line.
Everywhere that government touches, it inflates costs because people are spending money that's not theirs. I even noticed it. I have a contract manufacturing business. So we make stuff for industrial power and very, very, very straight commercial, super competitive markets versus a defense market. And those costs are easily 30 to 50 to 100% more just because government touches it and it screws it up.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to like a material problem that I think a lot of people care about, but also we can use as an example to explain how some of this works is the southern border. It feels like for years there were people who were always concerned with or focused on securing the border, whatever that meant, call it over the last couple of decades. But in the last 4 years or so, there's been an explosion of these border crossings, very much determined or described as just an open border. And it feels like now there is a conversation that, hey, this is a problem. One side of the political aisle has been saying that for 4 years. I think the other side of the political aisle, whether they actually mean it or not, is starting to say, hey, we want to close down the border. What is the ramifications of that open border in terms of there's safety, there's economic strain, there's healthcare strain, there's all these kind of almost like knock-on effects of a single decision of, hey, we're going to open the border, seems to be one of the biggest contributing factors to kind of the decline of American society.
Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I would argue, off of hey, we're going to lock down the border seriousness. And yes, America is a nation of immigrants. I'm Dutch. My family came from the Netherlands in 1915. But there was a time in the 1920s, I think 1924, they curtailed it and basically slowed it down, and it gave almost 20 years for some homogenization, right? For the melting pot to work, to the point that Italian-speaking kids from Manhattan went to Italy and fought for America. Imagine. But they identified that strongly as America. We don't have anywhere near that kind of national identity right now. So yes, the southern border issue is not an organized crime; it's an industrialized crime. There are actual travel agencies in Dubai. I just spoke to a couple of them last week, where there's travel packages, immigration travel packages for people coming out of Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan to fly on Turkish Airways through Istanbul. They drop them in Latin America, and they get linked into a bus system to bus them up through Mexico. It's ridiculous. So
somebody is coming out of like Bangladesh and they say, I want to go to America. And they literally get in touch with this travel agency.
Yep.
And they're paying, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of dollars, whatever it is.
Yeah, they buy the ticket for a couple grand one way.
Mm-hmm. But the travel agency is coordinating this.
Absolutely.
And then when they get on the ground, they're getting told, like, there's the border, go.
And they literally get handed off almost like a tour operator, right? I mean, if you go to Greece and you're going to go on a tour, you land, you get met by a bus, you go on your tour to meet the ship. In this case, you land somewhere in Latin America, you get met by a bus, and you're bussed up in, and they tell you, okay, they hand you off to this coyote. It's industrialized. There was enough pressure from the Trump administration last time to curtail a lot of that nonsense. All of the early Biden changes obviously lift that off, and so it's been a runaway train since. Again, that's fixable. But when you flood a society with that many people that were not born, and then you have a welfare system which reinforces almost ghettoization of people where they're receiving welfare benefits, they're not necessarily working, and their foreign language is now accommodated in the schools, right? The whole premise of a public education system is to be a common bottom few rungs of the ladder so that everybody has a fair chance. And that's another problem of government schools have really severely underperformed what the private sector offers. So again, without sounding like too much of a hardcore libertarian, which I guess I am, everything government touches, it tends to screw up.
How do we go from government has its hands in all of these different industries to it not having its hand? Is it just we need a administration to go in and be very committed to kind of ripping this out and firing people? Or what does that transition
look
like?
Two things. On the immigration reform, obviously big diplomatic pressure on Mexico to knock it off. Second, but you have a very left-wing, even more so than AMLO president there now, an actual communist, but still possible to pressurize that. Two, implement actual pressure to make it an unpleasant place to be if you're not in America legally. So you're not banked, you're not going to school, employers are not employing you, and so a lot of people will go home. Two, there's a lot of people that have committed significant crimes that final deportation orders have already been administered. It's like 1.6 million of those still floating around society.
Wait, say this again. There's 1.6 million people
with final deportation orders have been issued already, and they haven't been deported yet.
Is that a manpower
That's a government competence issue. You see I remember in like 2005, the Bush administration then was talking about adding some Border Patrol agents. And we at Blackwater got called before Congress to testify as a friendly one because they wanted to train these new Border Patrol agents. And I remember the Border Police, the CBP came with a figure of like $180,000 to train a new border guy and our price was like 40 or 50. And so Congress was trying to understand why we could do it for so little. And that's just the private sector versus government. It's a different cost thing. So when you look at how does the next administration deal with deportation of even people that are the 1.6 million that every court has already ruled they do not belong here. They've committed crimes while here. They need to go. Fine. That's I think that's more of an argument for the private sector to deal with that. Deputized.
Yeah. Part of what I kind of go back to in some of these situations is there's so much, just government waste that occurs. It's very hard for them to give up power.
Of course.
Right. And, it's human nature, right? Is, hey, I have a job. I don't want to lose my job. Give me more money, give me more budget, give me more whatever.
I have butted up against that every encounter with the federal government. They hate, every bureaucracy hates competition. They will close ranks and screw the private sector every way they can. Elon Musk is feeling that as well. Mm-hmm. I am firmly convinced that NASA issued that license for him to finally do that test and to grab the rocket out of thin air because they thought he was going to fail right then before the election.
So let's talk a little bit as to Blackwater and how you were able to win these contracts and serve the country with a very unique, I think, kind of employment model in terms of like who you were actually recruiting and how you were able to do it at a lower cost. Because I do think that there is parallels between you and the global war on terror and what you guys were able to accomplish and Elon and some of the things that he's trying to do because he's butting up against the same kind of machine that you were. And so maybe there's things Elon can learn from your experiences that he could apply now.
We butted up against the same thing, and I've used this argument. I was born in the summer of 1969, the summer of Woodstock and Apollo 11. And if someone said that 50 years later, the only way the U.S. gets to the International Space Station is on a Russian rocket or on a contractor rocket, they would have laughed you out of Johnson Space Center. But that's exactly the case. And we butted up against that as Blackwater, saying, well, you can't be doing that because it's inherently governmental. It's too hard. Only government can do that. And I would call nonsense on that, as he is very ably demonstrated. Blackwater started as a training facility. SEAL teams had used private facilities really since the 1970s. The SEAL team in the 90s, when I was in, our ammunition budget for 2,000 SEALs was the same amount as the 150,000 man Marine Corps, right? So we had a lot of ammo, took training very seriously, but no one had done a private facility on an industrial scale. And you say, well, why would you do that when there's government bases? Because government bases are very bureaucratic and very slow. And so when you have a platoon going through a workup, you didn't have time for a lot of the nonsense delays. And so I was in the usual position of having been in the SEALs, my father's success. I kind of knew what they needed, and I did it. I got out in 96, bought the land, and built it. And at the same time, I had taken over my father's original business made die-cast machines, big machines that squeeze a mold and makes aluminum or magnesium castings. And I've taken it through a lean transformation really based on the Toyota production system. So we took a bunch of cost out and designed out costs and big labor productivity improvements, and especially lean flow. And as I'm laying out Blackwater, I'm thinking, what does the military do? It recruits, vets, equips, trains, deploys, and supports people. We built a machine to do that, and that worked. And so as the company grew to do not just training, but security and aviation and logistics and medical, and we could process tens of thousands of people. We built an air wing of 73 aircraft of our company-owned aircraft to do that. And because we knew our costs and we viciously attacked waste, it was good. And it was antithetical to what government did.
What's so fascinating about your story is that one of my favorite entrepreneurs in all of history is a gentleman named Suleiman Olian, who comes out of Saudi Arabia. He worked for what at the time eventually became Aramco, and he worked in the warehouse. And what was so fascinating about it is because he worked in the warehouse and he was seeing what products are coming in or going out, he's very in tune with kind of the business, the unit economics, the suppliers, all this. And they decided they're going to have to build the pipelines to let's get the oil out of here. And so they create a program that does two things. One, we're going to have to use a vendor-based system. We can't do it all ourselves. We're going to have to contract out to people. But two is we're going to give the advantage either in the contract or in the pricing to Saudi-owned businesses. So he basically walks into work one day and he says, hey, I'm putting my 2 weeks in, but I know that you guys have a contract out for, I think it started with some trucks. And he says, I'm going to go start that company. Why don't you give me the contract? You guys know me, you trust me, et cetera. I'm going to go and I'm going to go build this out. Long story short, if you fast forward, he creates something called the Olean Group, and he ends up being probably the largest construction kind of conglomerate in the Middle East, simply because every time a contract came up, he was a trusted source. He had a proven track record of keeping costs low, delivering on time, et cetera. He keeps getting contract for contract for contract. What's fascinating about him is he was a businessman. And so he was always fascinated with the United States. And he constantly wanted to figure out how can he get access to financing. No one in the Middle East was providing financing, especially not to, kind of one of their countrymen. And so he started talking to American banks and they said, hey, look, we'd love to give you money. You've got a great business, but you have no collateral in the US. And so Suleiman ended up starting to put money in US banks so that he could just buy some stocks. So he had collateral so he could get financing. Turns out he becomes one of the largest investors in the US markets of anyone in the Middle East, simply because he did it for a really long time. He was making a lot of money and doing this whole thing. I always think of that story as essentially the private market kept going to, in that case, Aramco, but could have been the government, and said, what do you need now?
Yep.
Give me the order. I'll go do it. And I think the Blackwater story is so much of, okay, you need a training site. Let's build the training site, do that well. Okay, what's the next thing you need? And you just kind of continued. They almost like led you to what the business was, which really is an entrepreneurial story of just listening to the customer.
I said, I constantly preach to our team, there is no guarantee that we will exist next year. We are not a line item in the budget. We have to convince our customers to let us solve their problems. Mm-hmm. And that was our business mantra, I guess.
Given the lessons that you learned at Blackwater, when you think of Elon today, are there things that you think he should do that maybe would make his life a little bit easier?
What I wish I had done much earlier is diversify the business away from the government. Because the political nature of supporting a military at war, right? The anti-war left went after troops in Vietnam and in the Iraq, the whole GWAT thing. They love to go after contractors and they love to hate me. He was very wise to build a space business, but he did that. NASA was his first vendor, but he got smart building his own rockets. And what did he do? He built a Starlink fleet of satellites. Spectacular. And that is all private sector. And government regulates and constricts them, but that is a very big leverage point that he carries.
I mean, you already see it, right? The Russia-Ukraine conflict, there's been multiple times where people on both sides have yelled and screamed about Starlink access. You see, obviously, the natural disaster in North Carolina where Starlink's being provided. He just keeps running up to it everywhere.
Indispensable vendor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were Blackwater was the indispensable vendor in a lot of places because we would show up. I mean, 6 months ago, Sudan as a country melted down. There was 16,000 Americans and they needed to be evacuated. And Wall Street Journal called me and said, are you involved in evacuations? I said, no, I'm sitting this one out. I said, but wouldn't it be nice if there was an American company that owned its own aircraft that would go fly in there? Because nobody could fly aircraft in. Why? Because there's missiles flying around. So nobody wants to, all the insurers cancel. So we were self-insured. We would fly into those places. So yeah, I'm happy. I'm so happy for his success.
I don't think people quite understand in these conflict zones. I recently talked to two different people. One came out of the intelligence world. Another was a former special operator. And both of them in different ways have been involved in going and rescuing people, whether it was out of Ukraine during the Russian invasion. There were situations in Palestine, et cetera. And take, for example, this one group that was going and getting people out of Ukraine. They're not talking about like, hey, let me call the person and, hey, go walk to the airport and we'll make sure that you get on the commercial flight. These guys are going in, they're staging vehicles, they have communications, they have manpower, they have weapon. I mean, a very, very complex logistical operation. And as I was talking to him, one thing just kept hitting myself in the head was it used to be that if you had an American passport, the U.S. military would always come and get you. And it feels like today that may not actually be true.
Unfortunately, that is very true. As an American, they'll tax you anywhere you are in the world, but they'll not necessarily rescue you. But again, I contrast Haiti in May of this year. There was 2 young missionaries on their first mission in Port-au-Prince, newly married, and they're on the way back from a youth event. and they get attacked by a gang. They hardpoint in their house, and the husband has an M4, and he's holding off this gang in a gunfight. The wife is on the phone pleading for help, calling the U.S. Embassy, just 1 mile away. Calling and calling, asking for help. Calling the RSO, anybody at the embassy, and they do nothing. Okay? They didn't send, there's probably 12 Marines assigned. Nobody left the confines of the U.S. Embassy to drive 1 mile to help 2 American kids, missionaries in grave danger. Of course, they're overwhelmed, brutalized, murdered. Terrible. And that's just not how it's supposed to be if you're a U.S. citizen calling help for your government. And I contrast that with a little known story. At the end of, it was October of 2020. So a month before the election, a 27-year-old missionary on his farm in Niger, kidnapped by some jihadis. And the jihadis are driving him south to link up with Boko Haram. U.S. is watching with drones based at a base in Niger, which you've also been kicked out of. I think that the Biden administration has lost 9 embassy locations. Nobody talks about that. You talk about
when you say lost, as in they were disinvited,
withdrawn, closed. Yeah. Sudan, Ukraine, Afghanistan, onward. Anyway, so the jihadis are moving this guy south, and Trump, like 9 days before the election, authorizes a rescue. So the JSOC guys mount up, they move him to Spain, C-130, free fall in. They land, they go in, and the jihadis are bedded down with the one hostage. They find the hostage, secure him, kill everybody else. There was one guy off taking a leak. They let him live. Don't fuck with the Americans. Can you imagine the 27-year-old kid who goes to sleep surrounded by jihadis in the middle of the desert, and he wakes up to space aliens looking at him? Because they're not coming with 2 tubes, they're coming with 4, right? Canvas 21s. And just say, hey, we're Americans, we're here to get you home. That's how it's supposed to be. That's why we spend $750 billion.
I do think.
So it's really dangerous for us to equate buying stuff with buying capability. And if you don't have the willingness to engage when you're at the threshold, and if you don't have the right leadership, that will make that decision, right? What does Clausewitz talk about? 2 kinds of courage to win a war. Individual soldiers' courage, you saw, we have a lot of that. But the moral courage of leaders to commit their people to an uncertain outcome, that's the problem. When you have an elite that has no skin in the game, that has no understanding of going to do a difficult thing in a dangerous place, and they become bureaucratic cowards, that's where it all breaks down.
So you're a very interesting person to talk to about this, because I try to pay attention, I think, to society and understand the impact on the military, especially the pipeline in the military. And if I think of my experience, I went to Iraq in 2008, 2009. If you think of the things that happened after that, you had the bin Laden raid, which I think was highly celebratized, and people looked at it and said, hey, like, that is America doing what America does.
Yep.
Right? We will find you and we will kill you if you are a bad person. If you look at the Captain Phillips rescue, and kind of the famous shot off of a moving ship onto another moving ship, et cetera. Again, like, that is what America does. But then you have to.
But there's some nuance to that.
Okay.
And I think it makes my point exactly, because the rules of engagement that had been imposed by Team Obama was they could not take a shot unless there was an absolutely immediate threat to the hostage. And basically the on-scene commander got sick of waiting hour after hour after hour and nothing was happening. Finally said, he kind of reinterpreted the orders and took a shot. That's what finally resolved it. It was actually
a simultaneous shot of a couple of different snipers all shooting at the same time.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
It was moral courage of the on-scene leadership to say, enough of this shit.
Now, if we compare that to Benghazi, if we compare that to a number of different situations that have now become public, it feels like, again, the American passport, does it actually represent that they will come and get you? If people,
not just citizens, those are actual government employees. in a bad place. Yeah, it's amazing. If you think of there's 750, 800 billion in the defense budget, probably 30 to 50 of that is directly related to CSAR, combat search and rescue. And the amount of options that were available in an aircraft carrier battle group with 85 aircraft on board. You had a C-130 with a special operations team, guns loaded, everything. That's their mission, doing commanders in extremis force out of Croatia. Other aircraft out of Sicily, F-16s at Sigonella, or out of Viano in Italy. And then V-22s in Rota, Spain. All those things, capability, no moral courage of the leaders to commit their people to an uncertain outcome. Mm-hmm. And the bureaucratic hand-holding and kumbaya decision in Washington, and people died from it. And it's a bad look. And what happened there is a microcosm of what happened in Afghanistan, mm-hmm. when you had, I think, pretty clear indication given by General Miller of what was going to happen, the last commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, to say, if we pull the U.S. aircraft out and we're not bombing the Taliban anymore, it's going to go from they're grouping up in 5s and 10s and 50s to 200, 500, and 1,000. And that's what rolls over cities. Mm-hmm. And I called it 6 months before the actual collapse. And I was off by 2 weeks. But I based it just off of when I knew the fuel contract was ending. Because when they're not putting gas in U.S. aircraft, and they're not doing air support on, putting warheads on foreheads where they belong, it went bad.
So there's this famous story now, the Radisson Blu Hotel. I think it was in Somalia. There's a Delta Force operator.
No, that was it's in Mali.
In Mali, okay.
Yep.
And I think that this is almost like the perfect example of what you're talking about, where for those that don't know, there were some terrorists that went into the Radisson Blu Hotel. They began shooting up. They light it on fire. Yep. There's American citizens in there. A mile, 2 miles away, there's a couple of Marines. There's a single Delta Force operator, and I think that there was some CIA personnel. And the way the story gets told by the Delta Force operator is basically he says, I'm going to get my kit and I'm going to go there. That's what I do. This is what I was trained to do. And I believe he was discouraged from going.
Of course.
Right? I believe the leadership basically said, I know you can hear gunshots. I know people are dying. I know that you are one of the most proficient warriors we've ever trained and put on the battlefield. But just sit down, stand down.
Sure. Even the guys that when Benghazi happened, and I contrast this because a lot of people love to dish on Blackwater. The 8 or 10 diplomatic security service government employees that were protecting the U.S. ambassador in Benghazi, how many rounds did they fire when the attack happened?
I don't know.
0. Okay. How is that possible? How is it possible that your protectee dies and you didn't fight back? Is that cowardice? Is it incompetence? I don't know. But if you want to criticize Blackwater for being too diligent, I'll take that criticism. But no one under our protection ever died. But then the agency contractors, not agency employees, agency contractors, many of whom used to work for me, heard the gunfire, were going to move to the sound of the gunfire to actually help Americans in danger. And they were told not to by their bureaucrat boss. I mean, eventually they didn't listen and they moved to help people that were in grave danger.
And put themselves in danger for doing so.
Sure. Yeah. Look, even in a little known story, I think in 2006 or 7, it was when the first Special Forces team started showing up in Mali, trying to work with the locals and building them. And we were hired, Blackwater was, to put a couple of aircraft there for medevac and logistics support. And we were flying little Casa 212s. It's like a little shrunk C-130. And they're out at this very remote base in the big Schmal winds, huge, powerful wind. And it literally ripped the aircraft off its tie-down points, damaged the aircraft and the wing, picked the tent up that the active duty Army SF guys were in and tossed it across the ground, killed one guy, broke a guy's spine and pelvis, 2 others with other fractures. And one guy had major internal bleeding. That was the one that was in real danger. And all their comm gear was trashed. So our guys got the SATCOM going in the busted airplane, called the other aircraft, which was 800, 1,000 miles away, said, we're stuffed here, help. And so the other CASA launches, and we'd been prevented from having night vision goggles for some stupid bureaucratic reason. And our 18 Delta contractor medic strapped himself to the floor of the aircraft. And then they land on a single set of Hummer headlights in the desert at night during a storm. Now, if you've ever flown in the desert at night, it's dark. It redefines what dark looks like. And they land, they recover, and this medic starts working this guy. Okay. And they put every bit of fluid into this wounded SF guy because his blood pressure was crashing. And they called ahead to Ouagadougou, which is where we were flying in, which is the capital of Burkina Faso, in case you're wondering, to do an emergency blood drive because we needed some kind of trusted blood. And second, to go get some certain pain meds. And so back they land, and this guy is now inflated, right? He's just distended. And the Air Force still hasn't shown up with any kind of emergency surgery capability. So our medic, moral courage, said, well, shit, I'm not going to let him die. He opens him up. He does field surgery on him, takes the organs out, sure enough, finds the ruptured spleen, zip ties it, removes it, puts it in a baggie, puts the organs back in, closes him up, saves the guy's life. It's just fantastic. It's my second proudest professional moment.
What was the first?
I'll get to that. I was at Erik Olson's change of command. He was the first 4-star SEAL, taking charge of all of SOCOM. And I'm standing in line waiting to go in. And Admiral McCraven walks by, who is in charge of all special operations in Africa and in Europe. And he goes and he gives me a bear hug in uniform. He goes, that was some really sporty flying you guys did. I said, well, sir, that's why we have sporty pilots. And, but that's the kind of moral courage I love employing people like that to just find a way to get it done and win.
Mm-hmm. What was the first?
Speaking at the National War College in Washington. And, I got out of the Navy as a lieutenant. It was nothing. And all 300 colonels popped to attention. And I gave him the whole brief on what we're doing and why. And at the end of it, this guy came to me and he said, I was just in Baghdad as a commander, brigade commander. So he had 4,000 soldiers. And he said at the top of the dashboards of their Humvees, they'd have the Blackwater call signs and frequencies because they knew that if the shit went bad, if they called the Blackwater guys, they would come immediately. No questions, no bureaucracy. I said exactly what we want.
That is fantastic. If we bring it back to the United States, this moral clarity, this moral courage that you're talking about, how do we fix the situation here? We have an economic pain that is being felt by millions of Americans, national debt that is completely, not only just big, but accelerating. I think we've added $500 billion just in the month of October. What are the solutions that you think should be implemented?
Elon Musk is right about doing a massive culling of government bureaucracies. Mm-hmm. And that does two things. One, it's just the spend on the people. But two, having that many bureaucrats, it's like, what did Jefferson say in the Declaration of Independence about the king? He has set forth thousands of bureaucrats to eat out our substance. And the fact is, Washington is like 70% remote work now. So all the bureaucrats in the DC area, 70% of them don't even go into the office. So I'm not thinking there's a whole lot of productivity there, which is good, but let's give them a 1-year, 2-year severance, but let's just pare down massively.
How many, I don't know how many employees work for the federal government, but what percentage do you think we could fire and not notice?
Well, there's millions of employees and millions of contractors as well that
50% of the U.S. government we could fire and not even notice?
70.
You think 70%?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Look, Elon Musk fired 80% of Twitter, and Twitter is better than ever.
Yeah.
If you think that after 200 and almost 50 years, the federal government couldn't go on a diet, adding that many programs. I mean, what I'm saying might be considered radical. We either do it in an organized way or it's going to be fed to us when the dollar collapses. The problem with that many bureaucrats, with all that funding and no accountability, is they make a lot of rules. And there's like 100,000 pages of new regulations come out every year with the force of law, which directly impedes and impairs people from starting a business, people from innovating, from creating. And you know who it hurts the worst? The people at the bottom end of the spectrum. Okay. It doesn't hurt the BlackRocks and the Fortune 500 companies because they have the massive compliance programs and lawyers and all the rest. And they can ride out that kind of time delay. But for the guy or girl that comes up with a great idea in their garage to try to get it to market and they're just constantly blocked by licensing, it's wrong. Okay. So headcount reduction, bureaucracy reduction, the fact that the Supreme Court did curtail the Chevron deference. That was like the 1984 case. They just overturned that about 6 months ago. That is a huge win. And so you'll see litigation from that starts to chop away at a runaway regulatory state. And 3, the inflation is caused by us, by government especially, just spending way too much money. And I would say the fourth, and certainly not the fourth in priority, there's a book that really affected my thinking. It's called The Myth of Capitalism. I encourage your readers to read it, or your viewers to watch it or to read it. It makes the case that we have massively overconsolidated American industry. And it is that cozy relationship between big business and government, which is happy for regulations because it blocks out
the ladder
competitors
behind them.
Exactly. And it talks about like the average pay ratio, CEO to junior guy in 1972 was like 30 to 1. Now it's 360 to 1. Our CEOs have not gotten 12 times better since then. When you look at the overconsolidation in data, in search, in IT, in banking, in food processing, all these major industries, the regulatory state has driven the consolidation and the cartelization of many industries, including defense, and that needs to be broken up. The trust busting done effectively by the Teddy Roosevelt administration needs to be done again.
Let's talk about the history of America, because I think people actually may have.
On the way in here, you pointed out these captains of industry, phenomenal, right? They built it, but they also consolidated a lot, and they really restricted that. And what happened when Standard Oil was broken up? Rockefeller ended up making more money, but the competition brought by having multiple people coming to the table helped that innovation and speed.
What always is the paradox of Rockefeller in my mind is he's famous for this quote where he says, "I'd rather earn 1% off 100 people's effort than 100% off of just mine." But Standard Oil obviously was just one large company. When it broke up, then he still had ownership in many of the broken up components, and he did make more money. And so in a weird way, the way he looked at employees was different than the way he looked at business structure, but it seems like he learned over time that maybe the best way to put together your kind of empire is to just mimic the way that you work with people. And one of my favorite books is the Koch brothers. Charles Koch, I think, is the one who wrote it. He wrote a book called Good Profit. And in it, he basically describes their management philosophy and kind of the business structure and everything at the company. But one of the points in the book that everyone skips over when they read this book is he went and he studied the great civilizations throughout history. And he said, what are the commonalities? Because actually a company is no different than organizing people, having them all work towards something, et cetera. And what he figured out was, hey, you actually need to have these decentralized teams. You need to push decision-making down to the people closest to the problem, right? All these things that I think kind of have infiltrated into management kind of philosophy. But he didn't learn it from a business school. He learned it by studying civilizations, and the ones that rose and created resilience were able to become these like very productive organizations of people. And it sounds like you're kind of advocating for a very similar thing in business today, which the history of America, which many people don't know, was actually built by the private sector. And I know
look, America was started. Sorry to interrupt you. America was started not by the British government or by the British Army. It was started by 3 companies listed by this on the basically joint stock companies of the City of London. Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Jamestown colonies were funded as stock companies, and they hired private military contractors. Miles Standish, right? When you were a kid, you probably heard about Miles Standish at the first Thanksgiving, right? That guy was a private military contractor that was hired to protect the colony from Indians, criminals, wild animals, whatever. The same as John Smith in Jamestown. So that's what made America, and that kind of thrift, innovation, daring, efficiency. That is at our core of America, and we've gotten away from that. That's why when we tip towards socialism, it has the predictable results.
The building of America is not only just like built by companies, it's also financed by the private sector as well. And so what are the things that maybe we did to get here that we've kind of lost our way that you think we should go and re-implement? Is it something, NASA versus SpaceX and push everything into the private sector?
Well, when I think it's after the Reconstruction era, I think it's called the Golden Era, like from 1870 to about 1910. And you had this explosion, in a good way, of capitalism and infrastructure, railroads, telegraphs, farming, steam engines, power, electric lights. That was financed in an era of no income tax. It was tariffs only. Imagine that. And when we got away, when we embraced a Bolshevik Marxist idea of income tax, and the progressive era undid a lot of key things, right? Another bad thing that happened was the founding fathers got right. Of course, Congress, elected by the people, very much in touch with communities every 2 years. And if you think we've quadrupled the size of the country since we've increased the size of Congress. Now, I hate to advocate for more politicians, but making the House of Representatives much more responsive, because right now it's about 600,000 voters. If you took that down to every 200,000 or 300,000 voters and make Congress that much more responsive, I think you'd find it's fiscally more conservative. But the other bad thing that happened was we got away from how senators were elected, because the way the founding fathers laid it out, I think it was the 16th or 17th Amendment. It's a Wilson era thing that they screwed up. It used to be that state legislatures would elect the senators, so that the senators were largely doing the bidding of the states. But now senators are just elected with money that pours in from special interest groups from all over the country. And so they're beholden to that money, not to the state legislature that they're supposed to be representing. And that's why we have a runaway, very spendy, Senate.
It feels like there's this thread of like accountability, right? And so on one hand, you hear people, at least online, probably on Twitter, nowhere else, talking about like individual accountability and individual responsibility of, hey, no one's coming to save you. You've got to improve your life, make good decisions.
Prepare to self-rescue.
Yeah, self-rescue. Perfect. But at the same time, how many of the politicians in America actually get held accountable for the decisions they make, the outcomes of those programs they put in place, et cetera? It feels like if the individuals don't feel accountability or kind of the preparation for self-rescue, it's really hard to hold other people accountable, right? And so it's almost like if the individuals are put in this situation and they're not responding, maybe it is actually like we're rotting from within.
Sure. Look, we suffer from affluenza, right? From so much money, so much wealth, so much comfort, very easy to be distracted by football or whatever the pop artist du jour is, or whatever stupidity. And when the lights go out and when crime runs away and that kind of stuff, then it tends to wake people up. And so maybe in some areas people have woken up. We'll see what voter turnout is this election cycle, but I think it's going to be higher than what people have expected before.
What is your current view of Trump versus Harris, both policies, the candidates, and then what the outcome of the election will be?
Well, I think Trump is going to win. I think he has motivated a lot of You just look at the people that he attracted to this massive rally he had in New York, right? Asians and blacks and Latinos, and it's funny how the left criticizes a big rally with 18,000 inside and 100 and another 80 some thousand people outside. They want to disparage that as a Nazi rally. Come on. If that's all you can.
Well, with Israel flags hanging.
Exactly.
And, I think that there was a number of Jewish people who spoke on stage.
Yeah, it's people will lie, and eventually they're going to run out of gas on those lies. Policy wise, I think a second Trump go around, he realizes that people is policy, and he did not have the depth of a bench ready to go to actually make a lot of the changes, especially in the national security apparatus. And so that's why he didn't see a lot of, in any way, fundamental change to rein in a military industrial complex, a neocon attempts at foreign policy, and just a lot of stupidity.
So this is fascinating, I think, to a lot of people, because as the founder of Blackwater, who probably is the single most successful and effective private military contractor in our lifetime. I can say that. Maybe you're not allowed to say that, but I can say that.
No, Flying Tigers.
Okay.
What Claire Chennault did,
yeah,
he affected the outcome of the Pacific Theater.
Yeah, that's fair. One of, maybe we will we'll use it as a descriptor, but you understand that world better than almost anybody else. Definitely anyone I've ever talked with, and yet you essentially are advocating for Trump's strength as a deterrence without actually having to engage in war.
There's a continuum of statecraft. On one end, you have diplomacy and embassies and conferences. And the other end, you have aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, and tank divisions. And there's 80% of the middle, which I would call the intelligence world. And you have an intelligence community that has largely missed its mark and become very risk averse, very bureaucratic. What the Mossad accomplished with their pager op, the next day the walkie-talkie strikes against Hezbollah was absolutely spectacular. You have to have an intelligence community to be wildcatters at heart, right? Mm-hmm. A wildcatter is a guy that drills a well. Sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't.
Go bankrupt a couple times, but then you get rich.
But you have to have the courage to try. And for what we spend as a country for an intelligence apparatus, we should accomplish something like that once a month, for heaven's sakes.
And is that like, why are they specifically, at least the perception is they are so good, both in terms of the collection of intelligence, but also operations like that? Is that a cultural thing? Is that a higher IQ? Like what is it?
It's a matter of being very focused and having actual existential threats that are facing them. And
backed into a wall.
Yeah, look, when the agency is doing advertisements about how their most important factors are diversity and gathering intelligence on climate change, come on. I say the Chinese Communist Party and the SVR and the FSB and the GRU, those are, and the Iranians and the Cubans, and of course Islamic jihadi problems with Muslim Brotherhood. Those are the things they should be focused on. So again, when any bureaucratic organization is adrift, the nice thing is the agency is the most quick to be reformed because civil service rules don't apply in the same way that it does in the rest of the federal government. So you could actually fix that organization quite quickly. But I would advocate for less of a government approach. And if you lead, right, the business of America should be business. And I've met many leaders around the world who are so frustrated that the U.S. embassy in those locations becomes a beacon of forcing Green New Deal kind of reforms. So a country that's sitting on enormous amounts of hydrocarbons are arm twisted by the embassy to not develop it to be green. But, we have dozens of African countries where an average family of four has less access. They have less than 4 hours of 100-watt light bulb equivalent electricity per day. And they're sitting on billions of barrels of oil and gas. That's wrong. It is morally wrong to deprive them of the ability to develop themselves or to help them. Or the transgender or the other social engineering stuff. That's what the embassies have become, instead of being beacons of what's right in America, of capitalism, of equal opportunity. And if we wonder, people complain, well, China is really advanced in Africa and they're defeating us. They're pushing into a vacuum created by our own stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
And more capitalism, more, I would say, off-leash American companies going there and helping and creating and innovating. Are the American way, the way the America West was settled, is the way the rest of the world wants to grow with us, not under us, grow with us. Comes back to what we opened with. I'm an optimistic person, because if the U.S. government would just get the hell out of the way, be a lot of spectacular things can happen.
Who do you think the biggest American adversary is today? Is it
Chinese,
Russia?
Chinese
China?
Communist Party.
And in what ways are we locked in competition versus actual threat?
So
Today's episode is brought to you by Polkadot. Polkadot offers secure, scalable, and decentralized blockchain technology that perfectly aligns with the needs of innovative projects. It was developed by Gavin Wood, one of the co-founders of Ethereum and the creator of Solidity. Polkadot aims to build an internet where users have full control over their data and their applications. Polkadot offers tons of unique features, a shared security model, along with the new auction model and significant implementations like ASIC banking. Given these characteristics, it's easy to understand why Polkadot is gaining more and more traction in the cryptocurrency world. Some people even are talking about it as the AWS of Web3. Now, companies such as Mythical Games, Astor Network, and over 50 other independent blockchains with hundreds of applications already leverage Polkadot's technology to power their platforms. If you're looking for a reliable, scalable, and cutting-edge solution, Polkadot seems to be the top choice for industry players. Go check them out today at polkadot.com.
The Cold War, right, was a scrum between the idea of Western capitalism versus the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and really the tenets of Marxism. And it's the fundamental relationship of an individual with a state, right? We focus on individual rights and liberty. They focus on state control and everything accruing to the benefit of the state. And we went on for 35 years after World War II to 1980. It had been a policy of containment. Just stop the spread of communism. Reagan said, enough of this. We're going to F the commies. We're going to go at them economically, politically, culturally, socially, and make it difficult for them to run a communist empire. They never had anywhere near the industrial base that China does now. And, when Mao died, I think in 1976, and Deng Xiaoping took over, he said, geez, enough of this Cultural Revolution thing, because he'd actually been imprisoned then.
Mm-hmm.
And the first place they went to was Singapore, which was Han China personnel, but on capitalism, and said, we're doing that. And we're doing, what does he say, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And China pivoted and grew their economy like crazy and admitted them to the WTO, and it absolutely ate the heart out of our industrial base. Okay, whatever damage NAFTA did, the outsourcing of U.S. industry to China did 20x the damage. So now China has built a very nice machine, and they've been growing steadily. But now Xi has made himself dictator for life. You saw that in the last fall when he literally dragged Hu Jintao, his predecessor, out as the public FU, I'm in charge now. But he's also really clamped down on their entrepreneur class, right? When Jack Ma disappears, Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, a true unicorn, right? Because he was I think a high school English teacher, and he builds something 4 times the size of Amazon in terms of digital sales. And he disappears, and he's seen then embracing supervision, teaching at some rural school in China. He's done that a lot. And so the Chinese economy is suffering, but they have a very nice industrial base. But they are all about the what the party wants. And when I see a lot of the woke nonsense in America, it correlates directly back to kind of the aspects of the Cultural Revolution. It even ties back to even the early communist slogans and sayings of the 20s that you see in communist Russia. So there's a lot of bad ideas that keep resurfacing.
Yeah.
So in my mind, that competition of ideas of what actually made America effective, the governance, right? The individual rights, very limited government, an equal playing field. And it is not, I am not in favor of unrestrained big business. I am in favor of unrestrained business, and government's job is supposed to be to create some level of equal playing field, especially needs to be an antitrust enforcer. And we've done no antitrust enforcement for probably 40 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to change.
There's this idea of American security that I think is permeating throughout the country. It shows up in different ways. We talked a little bit about the border. One of the things the audience is very interested in is Bitcoin. And I think that it's a unique piece of technology because there's an aspect of like securing your economic value, right, as the holder of Bitcoin. But also I've long argued that Bitcoin and the design of it really takes the ideas of the American ethos and writes it into code. So just like the American government has kind of three branches of the government, in Bitcoin to get things done, you've got kind of three different groups of people that all need to come together to get that stuff approved. It takes ideas like freedom of speech, censorship resistance, et cetera, and kind of puts it into code. What is your view on Bitcoin and kind of how do you look at this as an asset moving forward?
Well, I wish I'd taken it more seriously earlier.
As with everyone watching, same thing.
Yeah. But to me, so I went to Hillsdale College, Austrian economics major. So very much in favor of the microeconomic approach in decision-making. And when you think about money as a means of exchange, and throughout history, that's been lots of things. It could be certain seashells. In the Netherlands for a while, it was tulips, right? There was a tulip inflation. Lots of different currencies over time. And so for a digital currency that is based on some unique code, makes perfect sense. I am all in favor of a competition to the SWIFT system because I think central banking and the way the government runs banks makes it very possible to politicize banking. I would say I've been a victim of that, and I'm not claiming victimhood, but it's nonsense how politicized everything has gotten.
Have you been debanked?
Oh yeah, sure.
And have you gotten reasons for why?
I have wrong ideas. So yeah, that's a sore subject. I'll name names, but maybe another time. But having the means of paying and saving and exchanging goods and services, to me, when I look at what M-Pesa did in Africa, which was because there's not a lot of banking infrastructure, there's nothing you can trust in Africa, but M-Pesa was a way to pay very small amounts through your cell phone. And so it was super empowering to the poorest of farmers so that they could grow something, transfer their goods, and get paid for it. It's fantastic. It's the underpinnings of capitalism. And so Bitcoin is a much bigger next generation version of that.
Do you think that former President Trump has come out and said, hey, we're going to create this like Bitcoin strategic stockpile and maybe even put a dent in the debt? Is it something that you look at Bitcoin as for the individuals, or do you think that there are things with the government or central bank where Bitcoin eventually kind of infiltrates?
I hope government stays as far away from it as possible. Just because like we've said, like I've said, everything government touches tends to get screwed up.
Mm-hmm. And then the banks, which are not the government, but some would argue are pretty damn close and may even control parts of the government. They seem to be leaning in quite heavily on Bitcoin. Obviously, we have the Bitcoin ETFs. How do you?
I think because it's a dam, they see they can't hold back anymore, and so they're either going to deal with it or going to get displaced by it.
Mm-hmm. I want to go around the world on some of the conflicts, but I want to actually start in the U.S. because there's one story that I see from my friends in the military, the intelligence communities, maybe people online who pay attention to this stuff, but I do not see the average American talking about, which is rumors or chatter online about a potential kind of wide-scale attack on election day. And it's a little unclear as to how credible these threats or chatter are, and then also what exactly that entails. But how do you view there's a lot of people here, we may not know who they are. There's a lot of groups who would love to disrupt or to kind of make a statement on something like the U.S. Election day. Do you put any credence to kind of some of these threats, or do you think that it's just chatter online that is hard to kind of pinpoint?
Here's what I know. For 17 days, there was large drones being flown over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Now, Langley Air Force Base is where most of the F-22s, the most capable air defense fighter in the world, are located. And the fact that they were permitted and all the different interested parties literally went briefed all the way to the President of the United States and did nothing to stop drones from flying over. Now, what do I think they were? I think they were Chinese drones launched off a vessel off the coast. And that was a probe. But the fact that nobody put somebody in a helicopter and followed, because the drones were flying 100 knots, about the speed. There's not some extraterrestrial device going at Mach 2.
How does that happen?
That comes from bureaucratic hand-holding and nobody saying, fuck this, I'm in charge. This is my base. You're not threatening my aircraft. Get in that helicopter, follow that drone, or go throw a cable over the pusher prop of that drone, knock it down, and I want to see who's controlling that. What's the code? What's the operating system? Where the hell did this thing come from? There was Chinese nationals that were detained recovering a drone from a tree in that area, and they were released. So again, to me, that is bureaucratic timidity of nobody saying, all right, in absence of clear orders from the top, I am assuming common sense is still in charge, and we're going to prevent this threat. Not after, because this wasn't 1 day or 2 days, 17 days.
That's the craziest part to me.
Okay,
is like, it's one thing if
who are we paying to be in charge for these positions if nobody's going to make a decision?
Well, it's like it's kind of like the balloon thing, right? It's like if a drone flies over an airbase and no one knew it was coming, or it could be a local kid, it could be whatever. It happens one time, it's in, it's out. Oh, not ideal, but understandable how that could happen. 17 days is basically like you rolled out the red carpet.
Or a high altitude balloon that's flying slowly at the speed of the winds over the United States, and nobody engages it. It's a large amount of unserious people put in positions that they shouldn't be allowed to make decisions.
So let's take those two stories as backdrop. There's a story that when I first saw it had every red flag go off. And I said to my wife, I said, there's going to be more to this story. And basically the initial report was, I believe that there was an officer, maybe a commander, about 30, 45 minutes from Fort Bragg, who shot and killed a
Chechen.
Well,
from Detroit.
The initial story was he shot and killed someone on his property. And then it came out that he may have shot and killed a telecommunications engineer, and it was positioned almost like a veteran who had an anger problem or something was kind of the initial reports. Fast forward, the story that I think is the last version that I've seen is that there was 2 Chechen citizens. One stayed in the car. One had a long camera with a lens, was taking photos of this guy's kids, his house, his property, him, etc. He went out to confront them. A conflict
with a 1911,
and he killed him.
Yeah.
And of course, very quickly, the internet sleuths begin looking. What is the company? Blah, blah, whatever. It goes to a random building and
in Detroit.
All this. So like that to me feels like the next escalation of you mentioned probe with the drones.
It's a probe.
Well, there's been probes on bases where people have
There's
drawn
been
up
probes. There's been EFPs fired against key transformers in California and in North Carolina and in Washington State. Right, key things. So EFP is a copper plate with explosive behind it, and it creates a a high velocity slug going about 8,000 feet per second, very nasty against armored vehicles in Iraq, I'm sure you experienced, but also very effective for standoff destruction of infrastructure. Yeah. And people have been testing and probing those. I think there's been at least 3 to 5 of those. That's 100% to probe. Mm-hmm. And so we have an FBI probably not doing its job on the counterintelligence side, but they're busy investigating parents going to school board meetings who are pissed off at transgender stuff.
Well, and if you go to the Chechen story, I mean, this is, again, one of our elite warriors in the military.
Yeah, it was a colonel assigned to JSOC.
He's not living in shotgun housing where his neighbors on each side can basically hear him on the phone in his house, right? He's living in the middle of the woods from what I understand. And it feels like that story popped its head up and that thing went away very quickly. And maybe for good reason. I always kind of look at these things and I say, listen, we don't have all the information. Maybe there's more to it that we don't know, whatever. But man, does it feel like there is a dotted line between open borders, a lack of strength as deterrence, and a lot more stories like that.
And it's a very dangerous assumption for us to assume what was will always will be. Mm-hmm. And this whole thing is shockingly fragile. Now, America is a very big and deep and resilient country. Look at what happened on 9/11, knocked down buildings, attacked the Pentagon. We got back to work the next day. But attacks on credibility and legitimacy of the election and things around that, it can be dangerous fast, especially when one party is calling the other party Hitler, which unleashes every amount of emotion and anger and irrationality to prevent that person from taking office. And that's, I think people have to de-escalate that kind of language because it can be very, very dangerous if it comes to it.
Speaking of the security of elections, you've been very vocal about the Venezuelan election.
I have.
And maybe you can give kind of a 30-second just overview for those who haven't been paying attention at all as to what's happened there. But also, there are certain similarities to what happened there that I think people have now started to try to tie to U.S. situation. So what happened in Venezuela, and then why have you been so vocal?
Sure. Venezuela was one of the per capita wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Enormous oil. There's a reason it's called El Dorado, the city of gold. And they voted in Chavismo, right? Hugo Chavez in 99. And he socialized, nationalized many parts of the country. They've had 3 elections, all of which were stolen by the ruling Chavista leftist party. Chavez died, appointed Chavez's lawyer was Celia Flores, and she got her husband named to be the successor. Nicolas Maduro was the head of the bus driver union. And so he stole the last 2 elections. This last time in July, they lost the election clearly 70-30.
Wow.
The receipts are out there, right? The actual receipts of each of the machines printed out. The opposition won clearly 70-30. And the Maduro clan is ignoring it as a good communist-backed communist government would. There's hundreds of Cuban intelligence agents that are around Maduro as his inner cordon of security. They have really perfected drug trafficking and drug processing. So they process the coca, a lot of the meth that is produced in the neighboring countries and exported to the world. So I trolled Maduro on Twitter a few days after they stole this election. I've had contact with Maria Corina Machado and with the predecessors that were trying to run against, offering support. And so anyway, I trolled Maduro and I said, if the Biden-Harris administration really want to support democracy and justice in Venezuela, they should raise the bounty, because there's already a warrant for the arrest of Nicolas Maduro for $15 million for drug trafficking by the DEA and $10 million for his interior minister, Diosdado Cabello. I said they should raise those to $100 million each, sit back and watch the magic happen. Because there's like 3,000 generals. One of them is going to, for $100 million, they were going to arrest him and make it change. And I said, you don't even need to use US taxpayer dollars. You could use frozen Venezuelan government money. Well, that went very viral throughout Venezuela. And I had thousands of people contact me saying, please do a GoFundMe. We want to help make a change. And so that program was launched. It's called Yakazi Venezuela. 30,000 people have contributed to it. It's raised 1.6 million because for literally 25 years, no one has actually pushed back hard on the government. And I won't go into too much detail, but Yakazi Venezuela will seek to restore democracy and normalcy in Venezuela. And there is a warrant for the arrest of Maduro. So it is legal to remove him from power.
So if I remember correctly, I think it is in Venezuela. There was a American who went and was training the military.
Yeah, there was there was a daytime over the beach effort made by somebody and they arrested. I think it was almost a false flag. I can't imagine anybody doing daylight over the beach.
And it was like, almost like he was like trying to train some group, but like, it was very obvious that they were training.
I think the regime is very brittle,
like attuned to what's happening.
Well, I think the regime is brittle. They have clearly lost the confidence of the people. There's a massive criminality. The difference in Venezuelan society versus our society is they don't have a Second Amendment, and they don't have. Here's the thing: what I find the Venezuelan people they've been wronged by socialism and communism, and it's been imposed on them and reinforced by the Cubans and the Iranians. There's actually an Iranian presence there supporting the Maduro security apparatus. I can't imagine. I grew up in West Michigan. And if Michigan was an independent country and the governor of Michigan had stolen the election for the last 25 years, my people would have made war on that, right? The Dutch, I don't see that. So I guess that's a unique characteristic of America is we have a fierceness and we demand, right? At least a lot of people that I know growing up have a view of themselves as a citizen with rights in a free republic. And you can push and push and push and maybe slowly boil that frog, but eventually that frog's going to jump and it's going to come out swinging.
What is the difference in your mind between what I will call kind of covert regime change, which the United States is constantly accused of doing all around the world throughout history, versus, hey, here's $100 million bounty, there's a warrant, free for all, somebody go and make it happen? Like, which one's better?
I will not answer that.
Okay. Let's go to a different conflict, which is Russia and Ukraine. And I think that may be the one that people point to as a prime example of the lack of strength that creates deterrence, where in a weird way, the U.S., if you follow the talk track that the United States refused to say in either direction whether Ukraine was going to join NATO or not, and almost was trying to govern or have diplomatic action through like strategic ambiguity,
strategic stupidity.
Yeah, we kind of just end up in a world where like people are like, all right, you guys are just kind of clowns, and we're coming in.
I think. I read a lot of military history.
I know you do.
And so I think it's important for Americans to realize that the Russians lost 22 million people, Soviets, in World War II. And while we were still messing around in North Africa, before even getting to Normandy, so we're in Morocco and Algeria and Operation Torch, the Russians erased 800,000 Germans from the order of battle at the Battle of Stalingrad. And they lost 1.2 million people doing it. Think of that. You know how many Americans were lost in the European theater? 250,000. As heavy as our losses were, it's nothing in comparison to what they lost. So for a Russian perspective, and you see now with the eastern expansion of NATO, which we'd promised not to do, to have more unfriendly troops on their border than at any time since May of 1941, when the Germans invaded Russia, Barbarossa, they get ornery about that. And then you have a key, not a part of Russia, Ukraine, but a key component, fellow traveler, trade partner, a lot of ethnic Russians in eastern parts of Ukraine. And then you're right, U.S. is toying with this idea of it's NATO, and I think we just kind of ignored the red lines and sent unserious people. Right, we send Wendy Sherman. Sure, she's a nice lady as the Deputy Secretary of State. You know what her job was before becoming at state? She was a social worker. So that's who we sent to go negotiate against Putin and Lavrov and Shoigu to say, don't invade Ukraine. Unserious. And now it's a debacle, and the Ukrainians are losing steadily. They have now tipped over the point where they are losing more KIA every day than they can even recruit. And in a battle of attrition, math matters. And Russian can generate far more troop count. And now they're even apparently drawing in North Korean troops, cannon fodder, but they will continue to grind away with a rototiller. And it's absolutely pointless. And I think it's also exceedingly the idiot politicians in America that say, wow, we're degrading Russian military capability. Bullshit. The Russian military is vastly better and smarter today than they were 2 years ago. They are learning and innovating. Their electronic warfare is exceedingly good. Why are a lot of very high dollar US systems not in high demand? Because they don't work. Because they might work for a month or two, and the Russians adapt with jamming and with spoofing, and that whole thing needs to end as quickly as possible. And I think, and I've also talked to other folks around the world that have attended the BRICS summit recently that was in the ski area off the Black Sea, Sochi, just 2 weeks ago. And they'd always seen the China-Russia relationship over the last 20 years had been one of parity. Mm-hmm. It's now shifted to where it's a junior role compared to China. And that's an exceedingly bad thing for America, because for 100 years, the U.S. foreign policy goal was to keep German industry from combining with Russian resources. But now all we've done is push Russian resources into a junior role with the Chinese Communist Party and their massive industrial base. And that is not good. I think America has far more in common culturally with Russia than we do certainly with China or India or Japan or Korea. And so we don't have to be our best friends, but we also don't have to be as antagonistic to them.
Trump says that he can solve the war before he takes office if he's elected. Do you think that's possible? Whether it's him or just like a quick solution if you put the right people in the room?
I think some reasonableness is possible.
Okay.
Now, is that within 6 weeks or 2 months? I don't know,
it's hard to tell.
But it's well, again, also Ukraine, that area fighting is also driven by seasons. So you have December, January, February, it's cold, you can maneuver, possible to fight. Once you get February, March, April, it's the great slush. And I don't know where you grew up, but farm fields that have been covered with snow, when they melt, it's one big boggy, gooey mess. And that's not a great time for maneuver.
I'm laughing because as I am talking to you, it's like talking to, a soldier who understands the realities of combat. It's some simple things is like, can we actually move on the battlefield?
Yeah.
Compared to politicians who say, well, like,
well,
why don't we fight? It's supposed to get warm then.
There's actually a Russian term specifically for the great slush. It's called the Great Rasputitsa.
There you go. Israel feels like surprise attacked by Hamas, and now it is game on in the region almost daily. in the American media, we are seeing Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. I mean, just go down the line. There is either incoming fire or there is some sort of outgoing operation.
Yeah, imagine 4 years ago saying that Israel was having to launch 100 aircraft to fly to Iran to strike targets inside. It's unthinkable as being necessary. But it's a collapse of credibility, collapse of deterrence, ties back to collapse of a great power in Afghanistan, getting beat by, there's a huge Army conference, the Association of the U.S. Army at the Washington Convention Center. And I go in there every year. I wish they would invite me as a speaker because I would like to shame them, to say, all right, guys, you had all of this stuff, all these hundreds of billions of dollars of stuff, and you get beat by 50,000 largely illiterate goat herders that didn't receive any outside help. Bad leadership, bad innovation, and you got rolled. The IDF, for all their confidence and competence, they got rolled on October 7. They were surprised. I know at 2 a.m. on the morning of October 7th, the head of the Mossad, the head of the Shabak, and the head of the chief of staff of the IDF met at the Kiryat, which is their Pentagon in Tel Aviv. Emergency meeting because they were seeing all kinds of noise in the system. Like, wait, something's happening. We don't know what. Reconvene at 8 a.m. Instead of, the only person that did something was the head of the Shabak. And I think he sent 3 12-man teams to the south. That's it. But one of them, and I say this as an example, that individual soldiers' courage still swings outcomes a lot. Sends one team, there's a traffic circle coming out of the north of Gaza. One of the teams went there. And of course, hundreds of Hamas guys rolled out of the north of Gaza or headed to Ashkelon, which is a city of like 200,000 or 300,000 people. They fought to the last man. 11 of the 12 guys killed in action, killed hundreds of Hamas guys. But imagine if hundreds of Hamas guys had made it to Ashkelon, the death count would have been 4 or 5 times what it was. But nobody else had done anything to actually prepare. Nobody said, wake up on the Army bases, stand to, lock and load. Nothing. And so it's a great reminder to not believe our own bullshit and be lulled into our technical competency. And I think we're way over dependent on SIGINT and IMINT and all those kind of things that we assume the enemy can't innovate around. I think the IDF did themselves a disservice in how they went into Gaza. I think they went and fought the fight that Hamas wanted to have. Mm-hmm. They built 300 miles of tunnels. They hid the hostages in the tunnels. So IDF bombs like crazy to this day with a lot of civilians around. And now a year plus passed and still hostages, still not resolved. I'm still frustrated. I gave them the option a month after. I went there in November, right after the thing happened, like 2 weeks after. And I took the best of Texas drilling because if it's one thing I don't know much, but I understand military bureaucracy. And I have lots of great Jewish friends, but I've never met a Jewish roughneck or a Jewish driller. And so I didn't think there'd be that level of expertise in their combat engineer corps to not really know what is possible, because horizontal drilling has really advanced a lot, and gave them the option of flooding all the tunnels, pumping millions of gallons of seawater into the tunnels of Gaza, flooding it. That would have done 3 things. 1, destroyed all the underground weapons caches. 2, prevented them from using it to maneuver and hiding. And 3, it would have flushed all the hostages up to the surface. Because one thing I understand about building Blackwater is moving water, because it is as flat as your kitchen table. And so we had to move millions of cubic meters of water to do that. And so pumping that, basically turning it into a duck impound would have protected the civilians, because you don't need to bomb through the tunnels. And who can complain about water? Well, they can complain about anything, but it's so much better for the civilians than getting bombed. It has caused, on top of the civilian death, it has been a huge black eye for the IDF globally. And they're having problems with ground combat also in the north because the Hezbollah hired North Korean tunnel engineers. I know this because they find North Korean porn in the tunnels when they go in them. I think in the north, they should have a year after, or even a month after, knowing they were going to go into the north, they should have supercharged the Lebanese armed forces. Let the Lebanese armed forces go after Hezbollah, because the Druze and the Christians and the Sunnis are also not fans of the fact that Hezbollah is the real power in Lebanon. They would have been seen as a liberator then, not as an aggressor.
Why did they not do the water in the tunnels?
I think they were blocked by somewhat from the Pentagon and somewhat of their own hubris or stubbornness. But it's frustrating. That's an out of the box thinking. I mean, I had 12,000 horsepower pumps lined up.
But this is what's so fascinating to me about you is I've never been in the room when you walk in one of those conversations, but I would have to imagine that two things are both true. When you walk in, you have a lot of credibility. You built Blackwater. You've seen this over and over again. You're very well read on military history. And I think you have a reputation for thinking outside the box. That's how you build a Blackwater. That's how you show up with these ideas, et cetera. But also, too, there's probably you're not from the U.S. military, right? In terms of your active role today. You did build Blackwater, and there's always, Blackwater founder Erik Prince, headlines, all that nonsense.
Whatever. But you're only as good as, I don't know, what are you going to do next?
Yeah.
And
your last operation,
I don't want
to
live off that. But I've been blocked so many places by the clown show that is the national security apparatus in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
America does not have to have such a black eye and such a lack of credibility around the world. There's so many of these fires that can be put out.
And these out of the box ideas, most people I don't think realize that is a lot of what special operations is about. It is not, hey, let's line up in a line, kind of
right. We're
Confederate Army style march across the field.
but shock troops is necessary in some places, but not all places.
Yeah. Another conflict, or maybe a brewing conflict that I think a lot of people are paying attention to, is China and Taiwan. There's a story of cheap labor and innovation and technology. There's also is the U.S. actually capable of defending Taiwan?
So the other thing we should cover from Ukraine is this, right? So this is the size charge that an FPV drone, a small civilian consumer type drone, a 7 or a 10-inch blade drone, modified with software, with a charge about this size, with a copper disc. It gives you the nice EFP jet. With a gap, you fill the exterior with steel shot, so you get a nice frag sleeve. And now you can fly that sucker. You can carry 6. He can carry 6. I can carry 6. So now together we can go smack 18 targets out to 15 kilometers away. It is the true democratization of precision strike. And that is the revolution in warfare, because it's cheap, man. It's not a $200,000 Javelin with a $300,000 launcher. It's 3,000, 3,000, 3,000. And that's a revolution in war. It's as big as Genghis Khan putting stirrups on horses. It's that big a deal. And so don't assume what was in the past is possible going forward. And so why that paradigm I think is worth talking about for China. They have lots of missile capability, and all of it is pre-registered on every known target in Taiwan. If you're dumb enough to drive an aircraft carrier right up the middle, probably a good chance it's going to get smacked. And so having a unconventional warfare approach to, if China does flex up and we want to do something to help Taiwan, the single best thing they could do is build a home guard. When America was fighting for its independence, 30, 40% were pro-crown, 30, 40% just, in the middle, just trying to survive. About 30% were pro-liberty, but only 3% of the population actually took up arms against Britain. If you did a home guard in Taiwan, because their military is about 150,000, largely worthless, literally a large collection of soy boys.
Mm-hmm.
And not a lot of fight there. But if you find the 3% of population that will fight, the CrossFitters, the marathoners, the volunteer firemen, teachers, policemen, and some reservists, give them proper training and give them a force package, an arms cache at each town, village, whatever, so that everything becomes an urban fight on top of a very high jungle terrain inland. It takes away the certainty of when you can seize it. Because if Xi is going to go for it, it's got to be quick.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot sustain a 1 or 2 year campaign to pacify Taiwan. It's got to be over in a couple of weeks.
It can't be. It has to be quick because it's going to take some time for the U.S. to get there, and then it turns into a bigger issue or something else.
If the U.S. does decide to go there, it's going to be bad because there's going to be indecision,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's friction for that because you have literally the tyranny of logistics of distance. But the bigger thing for China is they import 70, 80% of their hydrocarbons, a big chunk of their food, hugely trade dependent. And so if they have this ugly fight going on in Taiwan and Elon Musk makes it possible for the word to get out through Starlink and et cetera, it's bad. So if Xi's going to go, he wants it to be over quick, has to be over quick. And the uncertainty is 500,000 Taiwanese that say, not today, motherfucker. Sorry.
Quick is measured in days, weeks.
Weeks.
One other story, and you're touching on it here, that I think is maybe not even known, let alone there's not an emphasis put on it. Russian oil still made its way to Germany. It just went through China. The Taliban now controls a number of mineral deposits and mines that seem to be pretty important for the world. China has run around Africa and created all sorts of infrastructure, debt contracts, controlling various resources. There's the violent conflict, and then there is almost a kind of a, I'm going to call it like a mineral or natural
soft
resource.
power economic conflict.
Yeah. And so that seems to be happening. And I think where my eyes got open to this was, I remember India, which is largely considered a U.S. ally. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we kind of went around the world and almost like took sticks, right? Hey, you're going to take their oil or not? Well, you probably shouldn't do that. You want to be our friend? And India essentially told us to kick rocks. They said, we need the oil.
They're saving $400 million a day doing that.
By still accepting the oil.
Oh, yeah.
And so when push comes to shove, there's alliances and allies, but there's still people and they need certain resources.
Every country has interests and
Yes.
they're going to pursue those interests. And the elites in Washington that ignore those realities, the neocon paradigm, that's why we have the mess we have. And again, the Ukraine debacle should be brought to an end. China is an even bigger economy and to flex up against. Competing with them in Africa, not that hard. They're pushing into a vacuum. There is tons of countries that want more American capital, that want more American presence, but our regulation, our banks, right? I'll give you an example. If I have a mining activity going in an African country, there's not many banks that want to accept in the United States that want to accept a wire from an African country. It literally comes with a 10,000 pages of compliance nonsense just for doing that. So we have regulated ourselves into stasis and incompetence.
Well, for Americans who are used to dealing with Bitcoin or crypto, going in and out of these exchanges people been debanked. There's all the regulatory. From Africa is even worse, right?
Exactly.
So like for the crypto people, it's even worse than that. Well, the last thing I want to talk to you about is when I was a young boy, I think that I got a sense of patriotism from really two things. There was what I will call daily life, which included saying the Pledge of Allegiance before every single school. There was my parents that probably they had a sense of patriotism and it was important to them and they were proud of the country and they kind of instilled it in me and my brothers. And so that daily life just kind of reinforced it over and over again. And usually it was implicit, but it became something that you embodied. The second thing was what I would call programming. And so there was TV shows, there was movies, there was a whole bunch of stuff, everything from Saving Private Ryan to name, whatever movie ended up being popular. There have been a couple of movies that have been created. There's Lone Survivor, there's 12 Strong, right? There's been a couple. But it feels like in the same way that Google and many of the tech companies have heavily been discouraged from participating or working with the government, Hollywood and the entertainment industry is not a fan of continuing to permeate patriotism, these stories of so many of these war heroes, etc. And I think you can draw a dotted line to the recruitment numbers in the military. You can draw a dotted line to the decline of patriotism. Do you ever think that those things are having a bigger impact than maybe people kind of give them credit to? Like it feels like it's just there's a hole there that maybe wasn't there 20 years ago when Top Gun and some of these different movies were popular.
I went to the Naval Academy the year after the first Top Gun.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I had applied before, but obviously that spiked the applications. And why was the Navy in a big hurry to help Tom Cruise make a second one? Because of course it's a freaking love affair. That is a love story of naval aviation and patriotism and all the rest. It was fantastic. He did a magnificent job with it. So Hollywood is super left wing, but at its core, it's still capitalist. And when scripts like Top Gun come along, and he probably didn't have to go many places for financing for it, but those stories still make it out once in a while, and that resonates, and those become the fan favorites, and it drives that thinking. Recruiting numbers are down because you have a very woke military leadership that's saying one of the biggest threat is white rage. Come on. I mean, it's just stupidity. And people join the military. Fundamental difference, right? Marine Corps recruiting has consistent, and they have not had a hard time. They have their numbers haven't fallen, but their approach is maybe if you're good enough, you can be one of us, right? They still appeal to that warrior sense. And the Army has sadly, or the Navy has gone the way of, hey, join up and we'll pay for college and whatever. And that's
it's a form of socialism.
Exactly.
Right. We will give you a bunch of free stuff to do this.
Right. And I do remember my favorite SEAL team recruiting ad. They actually made one back in 2005, and it was showing SEAL teams doing all the cool kind of SEAL team stuff. And then it said, yep, somewhere, some guy right now is buying a minivan. And it was easy to see who would, to attract to that young hard charger. It's not hard to turn those numbers around. There are still, in June, I attended a Special Forces course graduation, and there was 230 absolute studs. They knew exactly which bathroom to use. They loved their country. Their families loved their country. And it was a great emblematic of what's right in America yet. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of stupid things, but I think it's important to keep perspective. But leadership does matter. The military in the 70s was a mess. It was a real mess. There was like the officer of the deck of an infantry, officer of the day of an infantry company, a Marine Corps, would have to be armed, literally, because there was that level of violence coming from draftees, criminal draftees doing stupid shit. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the 80s and the military reforms there corrected that. So there is a lot of core belief yet in the military that can be resurrected very quickly.
I actually
and seriousness of purpose tends to refocus those people's minds very quickly.
100%. I actually lied. I have one other question for you. You built a phone, which is probably one of the single hardest things for someone to try to do, but it may be one of the most important things. The phone is unplugged, I believe is the name of the business. Why is this such an important thing that, forget capital and money, you're spending your time, your energy, the kind of your most valuable resource that you're investing in making this happen. What is it about this that kind of resonates with you?
Well, this is an unplugged phone, and this resulted from a rage phone call after the 2020 election and seeing the hegemony that big tech had on speech and certain apps and throwing people off of certain app stores and platforms. And I said, we're never going to make big tech better by complaining about it, only if we can compete. And we had a tech team together doing a cyber unlock, and we literally pivoted overnight and said, we're going to build our own phone. So that's what this is. This is our device, our hardware, unplugged, but it's our operating system. And the difference is your phone has an advertising ID. It is built really around the business model of surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism really started after 9/11, when government rightly was looking for data to find more people of the profile of the 9/11 hijackers. And that uncapped a massive demand for consumer data, which combined with smartphones in like 2009 when they started coming out. So now apps were designed to fit with that app universe and that phone to collect and harvest everything you do, where you go, what you buy, who you call, what you browse, can turn on your camera and your GPS and your microphone in your phone and listen and export everything you do. And we know that's to be true because the vendors that make that possible to big tech tout it and sell it and market it. And I talked to many people and they say, yes, I was talking to my wife about needing a new mattress in our bedroom. And the next day they're getting advertising, not searching for it, not sending a message, talking about it with the phone on the nightstand. And the next day they're getting advertising for mattresses. So imagine your phone listening to your pillow talk with your spouse. I'm not ready to go there. So that's what this phone does. It prevents all of that because we don't have an advertising ID. So we have a huge app store with thousands of the same apps that you're used to: banking, travel, nav, sports, games, word processing, finance, whatever. But our phone prevents the collect of any of those apps sitting there. And it's actually the first phone with an actual privacy center, which has hard off functions. It has a self-destruct function. So if someone says, Pomp, give me your phone, I'm here to inspect it, and you unlock it and you can hand them a brick. Even a kill switch, which separates the battery from the electronics because you can't shut your phone off. It is continuing to build a digital data trail. Like now that I know where your office is, if I know one other place you've been with $1,000 in a credit card, I can track your location for the last 5 years.
I always find
it's shocking how much digital exhaust you give off. There's a scary book called The Means of Control, which describes that, and it kind of makes the case for this phone. We did 500 units last fall as a beta test, and we delivered 5,000 in May, and I've got another 10,000 coming in 2 weeks, just in time for Christmas.
Can people use the social media apps that exist on their iPhone?
Yes.
On it, and
Yes.
you basically still prevent. It
looks different because it's not giving you the super personalized, because it's not giving you that super personalized from your data harvest. But it works all over the world, from 2G up to 5G. You can drop a physical SIM, multiple eSIMs, big external. You can put a 2 gigabyte external drive on there as well.
How much do you sell a phone for?
$989.
That's cheaper than an iPhone.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, the last thing I really wanted to do is be in the phone business. But the unique part of our team, the guy that developed Pegasus was our CTO. So he really understands offense. He really understands defense, and taking that knowledge of having done things in the space. And the team did an amazing job, and we are to market, and it is working. And there are thousands of users around the world. It comes with our own secure messenger, VPN, antivirus, and many of the other encrypted apps that you're used to as well.
What is your hope for the business or your vision for it? Do you think you can go compete with an Apple?
To be an eternal thorn in the side of big tech. Never going to be public. It will be a private alternative for free people to speak and communicate freely. It is intentionally not an American company.
Explain that.
I think the U.S. government at some levels has become destructive to the First and the Fourth Amendments. When you look at what happened, you've heard of FISA, right? Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, supposed to be foreign, but they just did a massive expansion of it so that any federal agent can go to the companies, to Meta, to any of the companies that have your consumer data that you're giving off with all your electronic devices. And they can say, give me everything on Anthony without probable cause, without a warrant. So they can do a massive digital proctology exam on you on a fishing expedition. I find that absolutely unacceptable. That phone, the unplugged phone, is the only antidote you've got for that, because we don't give off any of that exhaust.
Just unplugged.com.
Unplugged.com.
Pretty good URL.
Order today. It'll deliver within 48 hours.
Amazing. Erik, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I think a lot of people look to you for both insights on the geopolitical side, but increasingly here at home and how we could fix many of the problems that we face. But as we started, you're an eternal optimist, which I appreciate.
I have traveled the world. I've not been to every country, but I've been to most. The United States is still the best on the planet and the last best hope. And so this place is worth fighting and defending for.
And for anybody who doesn't already follow you on Twitter, you have an excellent, every couple of days, you put out these off-leash updates. And I have a lot of friends who probably, they are envious because I have friends who they actually have paid services to do this for corporations, et cetera. But yours is free. It's posted on Twitter. Well, I read it. It's amazing.
Full disclosure, that's not me. That is my very capable analyst. And she has a list of specific targets I want her to dig for. And so she was sending it to me, and I sent it to some friends. So I said, well, why not make it free? So there we go.
It is, it's incredibly valuable. So people should go follow you on Twitter as well. But thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
What's up, guys? I hope you're enjoying this episode, but I got a quick message for you. I just released my very first book. It's called How to Live an Extraordinary Life. In this book, there are 65 life lessons that I've picked up over the years. These lessons will teach you about money, investing, relationships, work, health, happiness, and much more. In this book, I wrote letters to each one of my children, and I tried to share those life lessons with them. If you pick up this book, there's 3 things that I can promise you. The first is that it is very concise. The audiobook is only 3 hours. You can listen to it on a long drive or on a rainy afternoon. The second thing is that you're going to learn something. It's worth the price of admission just for the lessons themselves. And then the third thing is it will make you think more deeply about your life and how you try to live it. So go pick up How to Live an Extraordinary Life today. It's a quick read. It's very impactful. It's very concise. And it would mean the world to me for the support. Go check it out today on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you buy your books. Hardcover, audiobook, it all works. Thank you so much for the support, and I'd love to hear what you think about the new book.